I'm Ray Mears, and wherever I go, I try to learn from the people of the past.
One of the things that fascinates me are the tools that our ancestors used. These are barbed and tanged arrowheads from the Bronze Age, a mysterious period in history that straddles the use of stone into the use of metal. And it's the treasures of the Bronze Age that I'm going to explore.
These artifacts were made for pleasure, not just for purpose.
I think there's a sense of real delight in this.
Beyond simple form and function, they were designed to inspire awe and wonder.
And there it was. I just was transfixed.
And we can only guess at their true meaning.
It has to be something symbolic.
Together,
here we go.
They show us how the Bronze Age developed into an astonishingly advanced civilization.
What an incredible thing to be exploring. We can only guess at the complexity of life at that time. Absolutely. This is Minsmere in Suffolk, and standing here on this heath is like travelling in time. Very little has changed in this landscape. It's like looking out across a prehistoric landscape. Those are red deer. This is a deer that we once had a very close relationship to.
At the dawn of the Bronze Age, 4,500 years ago, people were already farming. But the hunter-gatherer traditions of their Stone Age ancestors were still essential to their way of life.
Red deer didn't just provide our ancestors with food, they provided the very clothing that they wore, their bedding. The tendons were used for sinews to sew their clothing, bone and antler were used to make needles. And we know that red deer picks were used to quarry flint. So the red deer was really important to us. And when I look at them across the landscape, I can feel that. I feel it in my core of my being. But I don't want you to just take my word for it that these were once important to our ancestors. Just up the road from here, at Southwold, there's an incredible artefact in the museum that really proves my point.
At Southwold Museum, former president Simon Loftus has agreed to show me around.
Simon,
Hi, Ray.
very
Nice
good
to
to
meet
meet you.
Like many small museums, this one is a treasure trove of local finds. And amongst the prehistoric fossils and human skulls is a very special artefact, the Easton Bavents Deer, one of Britain's very earliest works of art.
Wow, look at that.
This deer engraved on an ox bone 4,000 years ago.
With just a few simple lines, it's alive. You can see it's actually turned and you can see the chest. With just a couple of strokes, they've conveyed the spirit of the animal. The person who hunts this animal wants to put the arrow in the heart. There's a good chance that this was drawn by a hunter.
I think he's a Bronze Age cartoonist and he's just doodling and having fun.
Maybe. I think perhaps somebody who was going hunting, been hunting, was thinking about a deer and had a moment and an engraving tool and did a little work, a little sketch.
I think there's a sense of real delight in this, a sense of real pleasure as someone was sitting there carving it, sitting perhaps on a riverbank in an idle moment. But I still like to think of that sheer sense of pleasure in drawing something like this.
I think that's exactly what it shows. I think it's just the most beautiful thing. Well, that carving was amazing. As fresh as the day it was carved, and yet it's 4,000 years old. I find that staggering. But I've come 50 miles from there to the coast of North Norfolk, because at about the same time that that carving was being made, something even more remarkable was happening here.
At the beginning of the Bronze Age, this marshy wetland of dunes, small stunted trees and reed beds, extended for several miles out to sea. Over the years, the sea swallowed it up and drowned the land and everything on it. But 20 years ago, a monument on a colossal scale was unearthed on Holme Beach that provided a tantalising glimpse of what had been lost to the tides. Local man John Lorimer made the discovery.
Hey John, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
There you go. So where did this all take place?
Out there.
Shall we go and have a look?
Yes.
So this is a remarkable story.
Yeah, well, it's something close to my heart.
So talk me through that day. What were you doing out here?
Well, my brother-in-law made me a shrimp net, and we came down here to test it out. And we were waiting for the tide to go out. I hadn't gone out far enough to be able to take the net, so we decided to go crabbing in these peat scarps.
So these raised black areas, those are peat.
Yeah, well, it's peat that I was crabbing in, this sort of peat, with my brother-in-law, when I found this axe head.
Oh, look at that. Can I pick it up?
Yes.
That's amazing. A bronze axe head. Gosh.
Bronze is a hard metal alloy made from mixing tin and copper together. It was a truly revolutionary technology.
I mean, you can actually see where it's been sharpened. There's polish on the edge still from one of the sharpenings, and even some damage here on the sides. It must have been amazing to find this. What did you think when you found it?
Well, my brother-in-law said it was part of the wreck. So what I did was I put it in my back pocket and left it there until after we'd been shrimping and crabbing. And then I had a look at it. But I couldn't find anything like it in any book. And it wasn't until I came across a metal detecting magazine in the dentist, and there was
one of these, and then you recognised what it was. Now, you'd found the bronze axe. What brought you back? Were you hoping to find more things?
Yeah, well, in the detector magazine, it said you don't normally find one. You find more than one Bronze Age. You find a hoard, as such. So I kept coming down here.
You were actually going to find something much more interesting.
Yeah, I found a wooden structure that later on became known as Seahenge.
So tell me, what did you see?
A central stump, or a tree, upturned tree stump, and I literally watched the outer ring slowly appear over a period of weeks.
So as the silt was eroded, this thing started to emerge from the sea?
Yeah, that had to be something. That's when I rang up the Norfolk Archaeological Unit and asked them if they knew about a wooden circle on the beach.
The wooden circle was to turn out to be every bit as extraordinary as Stonehenge. The Norfolk Archaeological Unit asked archaeologist Dr. Maisie Taylor to investigate it.
Are these the timbers?
Yes.
Wow.
She offered me the rare chance to examine some of the preserved timbers stored at Lynne Museum in King's Lynn.
I feel like Howard Carter entering Tutankhamun's tomb. Wow. I can't believe I'm looking at a piece of wood cut so long ago.
This is a Rolls Royce, isn't it?
It's incredible.
Wonderful. You can see the tool marks very clearly,
Yeah.
and you can see that they're quite wide.
I'm really surprised by that. These are large axes that they've used here, and they're sharp. I'm really surprised that they could cut the wood with a Bronze Age axe as efficiently as that. It must have been amazing when you got the phone call to go and have a look at a piece of wood on the beach.
Yes, it was quite funny because it was a case of we wondered if you'd mind coming. We've got this thing and it's a bit strange and it might be nothing, but would you come and look? So I hopped in the car and went down there, and there it was. And I just was transfixed, and people were saying, "Oh, you don't think it's anything, do you? You know, I hope we haven't wasted your time." And I couldn't speak. I was just sort of making squeaky noises, sort of, "Oh, yeah, I can't believe it." And it was patently a prehistoric circle with a tree in the middle.
The circle is now on display at Lynne Museum.
Wow, what an incredible thing. And do we know how old this is?
Well, all the trees used in the structure were cut down between spring and summer in the year 2049 BC.
That's amazing.
It is amazing,
It is
isn't it?
truly that it survived is just incredible.
Yes, yeah. Everything about that statement is incredible. The fact that we know, you almost think you should know what people had for breakfast.
Today we're looking at a weather-beaten black piece of oak. What would that have looked like when it was finished?
It stood within its circle of timbers, and the timbers were edge to edge, so it would have been a solid wall round it with just a narrow entranceway. So you wouldn't actually have seen this until you got to the entranceway of the circle, and then you would have looked in and there it would have been. So it would have been even more dramatic, really.
That's amazing. But obviously they chose it with these roots for a purpose.
Yes. I think it has to be what we call a mortuary structure, so something to do with death. The shape of it from above is just like a hand with the roots extended round it, and a person, especially curled up in the crouch position, would fit perfectly in there. So they practice what's called excarnation.
Sky burial.
Exactly, sky burials, and getting rid of the flesh and the sort of corrupt parts and leaving just the clean bones of the person, and then they were taken and buried somewhere else.
Maisie, when I look at this, I feel several hands at work here.
Well, the actual way it's put together has got an overall supervision. I suppose you've got the architect, you've got the foreman pointing and telling everyone what to do and where to go, and then you've got the people actually doing the work, and then you've probably got people roasting the ox and making the tea. It's almost certainly an extended family. You're right at the beginning of the formation of clans and tribes.
When I look at this to me is a real Bronze Age treasure.
But if you're talking about value for knowledge and understanding and just an amazing picture of the past, this is real treasure. And it's not just an archaeological treasure, it's a national treasure. It's fantastic, absolutely fantastic.
Seahenge was just one of hundreds, possibly thousands, of wooden and stone circles built across Britain. Although they had a practical function, these grand ceremonial monuments were also designed to evoke awe and wonder. They're tantalizing evidence of a belief system that was shared right across Britain. So perhaps these small, scattered Bronze Age families were not as isolated as we think. At Norwich Castle Museum, Senior Curator of Archaeology, Dr. Tim Pessell, has something that suggests they were developing into a truly sophisticated society.
Tim, really nice to meet you. You're going to show me some of your treasures of the Bronze Age.
If we come this way, into the stalls.
Wow, all these boxes, Tim, I anticipate wonders.
Well, there is something wonderful. We've taken it off display for you, and it's in here. So, should we go and have a closer look? Thanks very much. Right. We come in here. So, this is the dirk that we want to show you. But before we do that, it's probably useful to see what a normal dirk looks like.
Okay, so these are dirks or daggers. I think one of the things that really interests me about the Bronze Age, there are two really classic things being done with bronze. One is the improvement of their
Yes.
cutting tools, but now they're also defending their property, their fields, their farms, and so you have these weapons.
The most important thing to remember when you look at things like this, that they're not these sorts of greens and browns that we see, but these are the same sort of colour as gold. They would have been glinting, flashing things, and status symbols as well.
Symbols. And they're also a warning, a deterrent. You know, largely, I think people are waving these things around, and it's like a couple of guys who've had too many beers on a nightclub. There's a lot of talk and not much action.
Quite probably. And the idea that's associated with these has been literally magnified in the Rudham Dirk. And here you can see what I mean.
Goodness me. It's enormous.
It's absolutely incredible, isn't it? So if you hold that...
Wow, to hold this is really special.
To hold something that rare,
Yeah.
it's one of those few things I think that really does still have that power and aura about it, taking you back 3,500 years. It's an incredible piece.
There's no way you're going to wield that. I mean, it's
No.
way too heavy.
Absolutely. And this is the really interesting thing. It's not important as a weapon as such because it was never finished as a weapon. It's been moulded with no attempt ever to sharpen it. So there is no cutting blade on it.
But it never had a handle fitted.
No. It has to be something symbolic.
And how do you think it became bent?
Well, this is an old bend, and therefore it was done very deliberately.
Deliberately?
Yeah.
Symbolically, maybe?
Symbolically.
Wow, what a story this must tell.
There are only 6 of these known in Europe. We have 2 from France, 2 from the Netherlands, and now 2 from England. And they are so similar, they must have been made, if not from the same mould, then by the same smith and in the same workshop. Wow. They're that similar.
And were they all buried?
They do all seem to have been buried.
The imagination runs riot with something
it
like
does.
this. I mean, the only symbology I can think of in terms of weaponry that might be buried is, of course, the origin of to bury the hatchet.
Absolutely.
We never know.
We never will. Is it a religious object? Is it buried deliberately as an offering to the gods? Is it a marriage alliance?
Maybe this was a treaty made between warring factions. I mean, it is really special. What mysteries are associated with this?
It's one of those magical objects that really opens a window into the past. Trying to understand the people that actually made something like this and how they were thinking, operating, what they believed, why they would want to make something like this. It's one of those fantastic objects that really brings prehistory alive.
I guess until this point, the Bronze Age had been the poor cousin of the Iron Age to me. What a mistake that was.
Bronze Age society was clearly advancing in leaps and bounds. By now, the people who made the Rudham Dirk were great travellers and traders. They were outward-facing and well-organised, perhaps even signing up to international treaties. And at home, their culture was evolving and maturing as well. I've come to Flag Fen in Cambridgeshire, where 40 years ago, archaeologist Dr. Francis Pryor made an astonishing find.
Francis.
All right.
So nice to meet you. It's a privilege. So, Francis, this is Flag Fen, which you discovered, and will turn out to be one of the most important Bronze Age sites ever discovered in Britain.
Yes, that's a bit of luck, wasn't it?
So tell me what happened.
Well, we were walking along this bit of dykeside, and it was quite different then. I mean, now it's lovely reeds and a sort of nature reserve, and it all feels natural and lovely. But in those days, they were sewage settling grounds.
God,
Right,
yep.
so it stank to high heaven. And there was a lot of really smelly mud, which, you know, in the fens we call it slub, which had been dredged out of a dike. So we were walking along in the slub, back to the pub, right? Desperate to get away from it all.
Yeah.
And I caught my foot, stubbed my toe against something in the slub. I bent down, picked up the piece of wood, which was covered in this muck, and I smoothed some of the muck off it, and lo and behold, it had a sharp pencil-like tip. But, and this is a key thing, right? It had been sharpened with a narrow-bladed axe. It was a late Bronze Age socketed axe, and I thought, whoopee, right?
Amazing.
Francis had quite literally stumbled upon a Bronze Age raised wooden causeway that ran across the flooded wetland and linked 2 small islands. At one end of the causeway, hundreds of Bronze Age artefacts had been deposited in the water. This was a sacred site where people came to honour their ancestors.
The ancestors were never far away, and I think that's why water was so important to them. Think about it. You know what you look like, I know what I look like. Why? Because we got mirrors. They didn't have mirrors in the Bronze Age. You didn't know what you looked like, for heaven's sake. Go to still water and you can see your reflection. So water is a reflection of life, but you pass through water and you drown. So when you make an offering of metal or something like that to water, you're actually offering it to the realms of the ancestors.
Shall we go to the roundhouse and make fire and get warm, because it's cold?
Isn't it? Yeah, go on, grab some sticks.
Bronze Age people may have made fire in a number of ways, including pyrite and flint. But their real skill was in controlling the fire and using it at high temperatures to smelt metal.
There we go.
With this new technology, they cast thousands of bronze tools, weapons, and artifacts. Because bronze was rare, these objects would have been highly valued.
And away we go.
I'm getting kippered here. Right, Ray, I've got some of the objects here.
Things you found here?
Yep, but first you've got to put them on.
Oh, right, yes,
Yep.
of course, I'm very happy to.
Now, this that I wanted to show you, it's a dagger, quite an unusual one, about 900 BC.
That's amazing.
And this handle, which is made out of red deer antler, was found resting on top of it.
And that's the connection from the hand to the tool, and it brings it to life. And I think what's really interesting looking at it is that it fits a right hand very well in this way. So it was disassembled.
It was actually pulled apart, and breaking things before you offer them to the waters is part of the rite. I think what it's saying is you're coming out of this world and you're going into the next. And I think their world was actually quite...
Making the objects dead.
Making the objects dead, exactly. Now, I would imagine that dagger was the prized possession of a grandfather or an elderly man, and he died, and it was placed in the ground in memory of him. But what's fascinating is that it gives us an idea of the scale of Bronze Age ceremonies. I've always imagined, you know, swords arching through the air and crowds of thousands, you know, like a big Hollywood blockbuster, but no. I reckon there were probably a couple of dozen people standing in a small group to remember Grandad. And these two bits of his dagger were offered to the water with a small group of people around them.
Ceremonies like this offer an insight into how well developed Bronze Age society had become.
One of the things that astonishes me about the Bronze Age is just how settled and civilized it was. You know, that's why they could make these great advances, because their societies were civilized. They had local government. You know, they weren't at each other's throats all the time. You're talking about a well-populated country with a fully developed landscape and communities and settlements and villages, and population steadily grew throughout the Bronze Age.
Amazing, isn't it? What an incredible thing to be exploring. I mean, we can only guess at the complexity of life at that time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think we underestimate our Bronze Age ancestors. They were tireless experimenters, continually evolving their technology, culture, and religion. They were ordered, law-abiding people. As Francis says, they were civilized. And with great civilizations comes great art.
And that's where I'm going now, to look at one of the most remarkable items ever found in British prehistory.
At Ely Museum in Cambridgeshire, Assistant Curator Sarah Addison and Finds Officer Helen Fowler have a treasure that truly shows just how far Bronze Age civilization had come.
Wow, look at that.
So this is the East Cambridgeshire gold torque. It's a 3,000-year-old Bronze Age gold torque, and it's one of the largest ones ever found in Britain and Ireland. And they could have been worn as necklaces, bracelets. They come in a variety of sizes.
I mean, this could even have been a belt.
Yes, it's very delicate, so you get this really fine and amazingly regular repetition of the twist. I mean, it's hard to believe that it was made 3,000 years ago. It looks like it was made by a machine.
Now, the person who discovered this, we'll call him Mr. X,
yes,
prefers to remain
anonymous. Yeah.
Obviously, he's probably out there hoping to find more, and, you know, fingers crossed that he does. But what did he make of it when he first found it? What was his story?
I know that he took it to the side of the field and laid it down in the longer grass, and then carried on metal detecting for several more hours. And when he was ready to pack up and go home, he couldn't quite find where he'd laid it down. So he had to use his metal detector to rediscover it all over again.
That's amazing.
He was aware that he needed to report it. And he came in with his wife and a briefcase, and I thought, okay, a small container within the briefcase. But no, the briefcase lid opened and out came this amazing thing. And I just... well, wow was one thought, and then immediately it was excitement, amazement, but also puzzlement.
God, what a story.
Would you like to hold it, Ray?
Wow, I didn't say it. That's a rare privilege.
There we go.
That's incredible. It feels very light because it's mostly air, isn't it?
Absolutely, it's so finely drawn out.
It's very deceptive. What an amazing thing. You know, when I hold it, I can sense people, the humanity in the object. I can also feel what the craftsman felt as he held this. I mean, I can only think he must have been holding his breath very carefully as he was doing this twisting. I wonder how long it took. And it just makes you wonder about who was it made for? Who was it made by? It's absolutely typical Bronze Age treasure, an artifact that poses more questions than it answers.
The great gold torque of Ely must have been made for a powerful figure. It shows us that by now a kind of tribal aristocracy was starting to emerge. In the years ahead, local kingdoms would develop, ruled by warrior tribes. And here in the east of the country, it would have been the Iceni tribe, made famous by their warrior queen, Boudica. I'm returning to Norwich Castle Museum, where curator Tim Pessell wants to show me one of Britain's most famous treasures.
Here we have one of the national treasures of Britain, the Snettisham treasure of Iron Age date from Snettisham in northwest Norfolk. We've got something like 200 items from the entire treasure. For a long time it was considered as the treasury of the Iceni tribe, something like 40 kilos worth of gold.
40 kilos.
It's an incredible amount of gold.
I mean, this is incredibly ostentatious. There's a real confidence here. But this is where the Bronze Age was leading. All of that technology, the growing confidence in their tools,
yes.
Even their religion, it's all heading in this direction.
Absolutely.
So this is where my Bronze Age treasure hunt ends, with what could have been the treasure of our most famous warrior queen, Boudica.
I really feel as though I've been time travelling in the Bronze Age. It's an age I didn't really know very much about, and I've learned to really respect it. I've seen all sorts of incredible things, but to me, the real treasure of the Bronze Age is none of those things. It's the people themselves, the people who lived in this landscape, who knew it intimately, and who've bequeathed to us a legacy of incredible mysteries that we will be forever unpicking.